Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As we approach our meals, you have to ask yourself, what am I trying to do here? Am I eating to enjoy myself and to basically get the kind of nutrients my body needs to re-energize itself? Or are you just trying to feel a hole because somehow there's a deep anxiety burning? I mean, after all, think about it. Your drive after work home can sometimes be a very crazy one. Sometimes we'll do things that really make other people nervous behind the wheel. So you pull over to a fast food joint, figure get yourself a burger and some french fries, and the next thing you know, you feel a little bit better because the anxiousness has died down. But what about the cost of your health and having such habits of mindless eating? Well, joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone who spent more than a decade learning about the human body and also being able to help people with their addictions as well as spiritual coaching. She's also a certified massage therapist and works at the Mindful Wellness Center, which is located in Portland, Oregon, as a nutritional therapist and certified coach. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest who's going to share with us what it means to mindfully eat. Cody Flint joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Cody, thank you for joining us here.
Thank you for having me, Daniel. I'm excited to be here with you.
Well, excitement is a very good thing, especially when it comes to mindful eating. Tell us about that.
Well, where to start? I'd like to kind of start with a broader look of how we eat as a whole in our country. It's kind of tough because it stems all the way back to our caveman or cavewoman days when food was scarce and we needed to load up for times of famine. So we would really seek out salt, sugar, and fat, which were scarce but needed for our survival. And our bodies would take on extra fat to keep us warm as a storage system in case we weren't able to find food. And it's actually the same is true today, but famine is not the same issue that it was then. In fact, food cues are everywhere. We currently live in a world where salt, sugar, and fat are not only plentiful, but images of these foods and substances are constantly being thrown in our face through advertising on TV, billboards, radios, you name it. It's showing you food cues to eat these refined foods. And about 70 years ago, so moving into the closer future, food was viewed quite differently than it is today. Meals were at set times. Snacking was kind of frowned upon in between meals. Food was cooked at home more and eaten together in a mindful way as families, where there was time to relax and talk and enjoy their food. And it all changed pretty drastically with the inclusion of frozen dinners, microwave ovens, and fast food. As you mentioned before, fast food and food that is made in mass production, they're actually using techniques to enhance the smells of these foods that engage our hormones to want them more. And couple that with our changing lifestyles and the increased access to these processed foods meant that our intake of nutritious local produce was much lower. And at the same time, our intake of fat, sugar, even alcohol, and other additives was much higher. In fact, it's estimated that the average person in an industrialized country eats more than 8 pounds of additives each year, which is super gross.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very encouraging at all.
Not at all. And this fast processed food made it easy to go out or to make a quick meal at the end of the day. It kind of is conducive to living in a busy environment, and it makes food a mindless experience, as you mentioned before. And then we saw the addition of high fructose corn syrup into our diets, which is actually causing a huge addiction problem. And foods are being genetically altered to be more palatable, to directly encourage us to eat them more. Mm-hmm. Then we saw the value meal, which was a pretty big change, actually. Fast food came into play, but you could just order 1 or 2 things off the menu and be okay. And then companies started to bundle their meals. And this bundling made us eat more. We went back to the old adage of clean your plate, like our mothers always told us. And that created a huge danger, especially when supersizing came into bundled meals, because it increased our intake that much further. And we've all heard or seen the documentary Super Size Me, where the gentleman goes for a month on only McDonald's food and it almost killed him. It took, I think I read that it took about 15 months for him to get back down to a healthy weight after
Wow.
1 month of eating. Yeah, it's incredible. They've termed this new type of diet the global industrial diet, and it's been shown to really increase our health issues. Cancer, stroke, heart attack, diabetes, inflammation causing joint pain is a huge one, even cancer. So there are several studies showing the increase of diabetes, particularly corresponding with processed food and high fructose corn syrup.
Right.
So all of this is kind of led in a nonchalant way of looking at food. For instance, we place a lot of importance on what we have: a nice house filled with nice things, a nice car, maybe a sports car, a luxury vehicle. So when we think about it, what type of gas are we using in this nice car? We're probably not putting diesel fuel in our sports car just because it might be a few cents cheaper. And if we did, what would happen? The car would develop issues. It would stop working correctly, and then it wouldn't run at all. So why then would we put this high-fat, high-sugar food in our body expecting everything to be okay? When we eat, it has a direct effect on our mental, physical, and even emotional health, and yet we're convinced that it's okay to mindlessly eat whatever option is fastest and easiest, even if that means we're putting diesel fuel in our sports cars.
Right. I know what I was astounded about, this was probably about 15 years ago, is I was at a water park, and what I was astounded by were the obese children and how many of them they were. I was just looking at this like, I can't believe, what are these parents feeding their kids? It just was blowing my mind just how overweight most of them looked. Not just a few, but most of them.
Right. I mean, and you see it all the time. You see families in fast food places, and parents are still encouraging their children to eat every bit of that. And then with the lack of exercise, I mean, I hate to pinpoint video games because certainly that's not all it is. I think TV in general has created a more sedentary lifestyle than what it was in the pre-TV era. Even when I was a kid, you went outside and you played with people because
Right.
that was your option. That's what there was to do. It was just more physical. So I think the combination between all the and snacks after school are processed or high in sugar, a healthy drink is 100% fruit juice, which is great, but it's really not that healthy. It's a lot of sugar.
Well, here's the other thing, too, Cody. If you take a look at, for instance, the produce sections of stores, you're now starting to see a rise in things such as coconut milk, coconut water. Now they have the exotic berry drinks. So this is all under the facade that these are healthy for you because, of course, you buy them very expensively in the produce section,
Mm-hmm.
right? But then you look at the label, and one of the key first ingredients is what you were talking about, which was corn syrup, corn sugar.
Mm-hmm.
So they found a way to come after the drinks that are supposed to be improving your health. Well, now they found another place to put corn.
Right, as if it's not enough.
Right. I'm glad it's in my paints and it's made up, my paintbrush, but, I don't want it in my acai berry drink or whatever they call that, so.
That's right.
Now, mindful eating, what exactly is this as you coach somebody in this direction? What happens here?
In a typical mindful eating session, or if somebody were to come to me for mindful eating, we would first look at, kind of what their goals are. We would look at where they want to go with their eating, maybe some symptoms that they have right now, anything that they're experiencing currently, if the doctors talk to them about food allergies, anything like that. Kind of get a good idea of where they want to go and where they want to move, if it's weight loss, if it's to support better bone or muscle tissue intake. It just all depends. We do a nutrition deficiency assessment to kind of assess, where people are at and what they're needing. A lot of times when you have nutritional deficiencies, it shows up all over your body. It's not just in one spot or another, or, my liver, my pancreas. It's everywhere. You can even see it on your face. Eating a nutritionally void diet makes you age faster, makes your bones weaker. Gaining weight obviously is an issue. So what we look at is different techniques and ways to easily and enjoyably change how you're eating. I find that when I do things, if I don't like doing them, I tend to not do them. So if we can find ways that make small changes with a large impact in your diet, or small bursts of exercise, like 5 minutes an hour of exercise is actually better for you than lumping all your exercise in at one point in your day. And it's easier to just get up and maybe move around for 5 minutes than it is to clear an hour out of your schedule after work. We just look at the different aspects of what we can change in your life that lead you to living a healthier life, a more pain-controlled life, a less inflammatory life. Looking at nutrition labels, as you mentioned, is a big deal. It's something that we don't do enough of. And knowing what you're looking at is an even bigger deal. It's easy to read them, and you're like, yep, that's
the
a
fact
lot
that
of
you
sugar.
have to read a label means that you're probably not going in the right direction with your food choices entirely.
Right. Whole foods are pretty important. And they're not as hard to eat as people think. I mean, I have no problems eating a bell pepper or a tomato like an apple. You know, it's just rewiring your brain to look at food in a different way.
You know, speaking of looking at food in a different way, there was a family that is really big into, you know, doing green and fruit smoothies. You know, they've actually made a family business out of doing this, a pretty good little industry. But on their website, what they had is they had pictures, not necessarily pictures, but drawings, I guess, of plants. You know, fairly recognizable plants, like an oak leaf, for instance, a fern, so forth. And what was interesting is they found that most children and young adults recognized the advertising symbols over the plants. That's how out of touch we've gotten from nature.
Wow.
That's a pretty sad thing when you think about it. I know what a Toyota symbol looks like, but I don't know, you know, what kind of leaf from what tree that comes from.
That's right. It is amazing how far we've gotten from the more holistic diet that we started with. I mean, eating, and it's easy to eat a variety of foods. They're all very colorful. You pick a couple different fruits and vegetables with a variation of color. They're going to provide a variation of minerals and vitamins that you need. So it's not as hard as advertising and food manufacturers have led us to believe to eat a whole foods diet.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what's happened, too, that I've noticed, and it was interesting, I had a guest some time ago actually say this, and she was so right on the money. She says, we've kind of become people who have seemingly lost the confidence to know what's good and what is right for ourselves. We've sort of surrendered over to people who claim to be experts and gurus that know better than we do about making good decisions. And I'm thinking, well, you know, you're the one eating the food. How do you feel afterwards? You know, that should be the first thing, you know. Do you feel good? Do you feel happy? Or do you feel drained and you're ready for a nap?
Right, exactly. Well, and that's exactly true. I think that part of being mindful and participating in a mindful experience is listening to your body. You know, you have to choose why you're eating. Are you stressed out? Have you had a hard day? You know, it's like you were saying earlier about your drive home. You feel that anxiousness and you think, well, you know, I've got to fill this with something. I need chocolate cake and pizza stat, you know.
Right.
And it's funny because it really does fill that void. You know, you really do get comfort, that's why they call them comfort foods, from eating these foods. They pacify you for a short time. Basically, you know, we're self-medicating with food, especially where stress is concerned. You know, what we're seeing is that we're eating all these sugar and fat-filled foods, and they light up our brain in the same way that a drug addiction would when we're about to get a fix of that drug. You know, our brains say, oh, this is great. This is all I need. I'm good. But it's just a short time. You know, I mean, it's not a lasting change. It's not something that's good for you, certainly. really lead you to health problems like liver dysfunction, diabetes. It can impair your brain function. I mean, it just doesn't seem worth it to have that moment of comfort. It's really crazy because sugar hampers your stress response overall. It's governed by cortisol, which is best known for our flight or fight response, which is produced by our adrenal glands. And when comfort eating becomes a behavior, it lessens our stress response so that we minimize our response to acute stress, and it exhausts our adrenal glands. And so it's this double-edged sword. You know, it's not only dampening down our stress response, but it also leads to greater risk of abdominal fat because that cortisol, it kind of stimulates your cells. When they hit a fat cell, it stimulates the enzymes to go ahead and store fat in that fat cell. And what they've noticed, they did a study at the University of California in San Francisco, and what they noticed that was people with more central weight gain actually had higher stress levels and were just gaining more weight. So, I mean, like, when you think about it, it's a lot to deal with to just mindlessly eat whatever we want all the time.
Exactly, just kind of grabbing for whatever you want. You know, it's really interesting, too, how America looks at food. There was a Frenchman who was a sort of the go-to guy for companies who want to improve their marketing efforts to get people, of course, to buy their products and services. And he does it by discovering what the code is, you know, that sort of subconscious or unconscious thing that we think about, you know, that really motivates us to make decisions, even if it's for something irrational. For instance, smoking cigarettes. You know, back in the day when people were just firing up left and right, you did it because you looked suave or cool. You know, there was an image behind smoking, even though, you know, for most people who had first started smoking realized it wasn't as fun or as glamorous as it looks.
Right.
But you continue to do it because eventually you're hooked and you're addicted, and before you know it, the potential for lung cancer and a number of things start, you know, happening, and this is all in the name of glamour. But back to this gentleman, he discovered the code in America for food, and think about this, because there was a lot of truth to this, is fuel. We think of it as energy. You know, for instance, in France, or, you know, most of Europe, when they think of food, they think of celebration, you know, families getting together, you know, and eating good meals. So a lot of people, what's the big deal with French cooking? Well, if you do cooking yourself, you realize, well, they use a lot of very fresh, natural ingredients. That's what makes French and European cooking so appealing to a lot of people. But you can do that here in America. But because we think of it as fuel, you know, we've got to get the right nutrients in. Yeah, just the whole way we go about looking at food, it's almost as though we eat like we hate it, doesn't it?
It is. You know, my husband and I actually visited Costa Rica several years ago, and we really noticed that their culture of eating was very different from the one we had accepted here in the United States. There were no fast food chains, no drive-through windows, people weren't eating on the go. People stopped what they were doing, they sat down, they enjoyed their meals. They were being mindful about their eating by participating in their experience. And the food was freshly prepared using whole food ingredients, and it was delicious. You know, there was no Monsanto delivering processed foods, and there isn't high fructose corn syrup because they've actually outlawed high fructose corn syrup in their country, as have most countries around the world. We're actually one of very few countries that will allow high fructose corn syrup in our food.
Right.
And you're right. I mean, when you look at that type of culture and you compare it to the one that we have here, or in most first world societies, you know, food is fuel. It just feeds the machine, and that's it. You know, when you're busy and you don't stop to eat, you're just like, oh, I'm too busy. Food's not important enough yet. You know, and then when you do stop, you're starving.
Yeah, and I think what's sad about what you're talking about is we've become detached. It's like food is that thing that we just sort of have to get through to get on to the next thing, so to speak.
It really is. I mean, you know, we're really nonchalant about how we eat. We just know that we have to eat at some point, so we do.
Right.
And it is sad because, gosh, food is delicious.
Right.
Whole foods and vegetables have boisterous flavor. They're beautifully colored. They make lovely looking meals. They add all the vitamins and nutrients that our body needs to survive.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to find that in a cheeseburger.
Not too much.
Not even with lettuce on it.
Yeah. I'm curious, as you've been working with people for more than a decade in coaching, especially when it comes to helping people to mindfully eat, how often have you seen it where people have showed up to be coached and they really have no cooking experience?
I definitely see that. And I think a lot of that comes from what I see it come from is the last couple of generations, like I said earlier, with this processed food being so readily available, you could just pull something out of the microwave, out of the freezer and pop it in your microwave, and there's dinner, especially when you're just one person, and it's hard to cook a whole meal for just one person, but I think part of the process of learning to mindfully eat and a step that you make to enjoy food more is to learn to eat recipes that aren't difficult. It doesn't need to be difficult to be delicious. Mm-hmm. When I first started cooking, I found a tremendous cookbook called 6 Ingredients or Less. Every recipe has 6 ingredients or less.
That's interesting you should say that, because my wife actually had brought home what was called a 4-ingredient cookbook.
Awesome.
And what was interesting is I never really opened the book to take any recipes from that, but what I did is I applied the concept.
Exactly.
And it's pretty amazing not only what you come up with, but I've always been an advocate of when you go to prepare food, really understand the taste of it on its own, its own natural taste, and how can you blend that with other tastes. It's pretty amazing when you can make a ribeye steak and you make a mango salsa to go on top of beef. Who would ever think of a mango and a beef steak going together? But they go together deliciously.
Right, exactly. Well, and then after you've done that for a little while, you're like, whew, I'm really good at this.
Yeah.
I'm going to add lots more ingredients if I want to.
Fortunately, as I was being raised, that was one thing my mother made sure we all knew how to do, which was to cook. She said I wanted to be sure that you didn't have to marry somebody to do those things for you. But cooking is something, I had to ask you that question because I find that, sometimes I bump into people who cook and really know how to cook, and then other times they're pretty much like you were describing, throw the food in the microwave and, hit the fast food place or a restaurant. And I realize, if people got into preparing meals, even if it's just for themselves, there's a very meditative, creative quality going on. Even after a long, hard day at work, it's a great stress relief.
It is a great stress relief, and that's part of the mindful process, is preparing foods are going to nourish your body. And it can give you a very uplifting feeling, and especially once you've created a meal, and you sit down to eat this beautiful, nutritious meal that you have made for yourself, it's like you're pampering yourself. It's like you're doing yourself a huge favor by making this great dinner. And you sit down and you take a moment, you smell it. It smells so good. You take a moment to taste it. You chew slowly, making sure that your digestive system will work properly and with ease. And making sure that you're not overeating because you're eating slow enough for that food to make it to your stomach before you shovel in the next bite. But you really enjoy the experience, And that's where the mental benefit of mindful eating kind of comes into play. There's definitely a chemical balance there that you're feeding. You're getting the nutrients that help alleviate depression and anxiety. But you're also taking that small time out of your day. I mean, we're all so busy. It's all go all the time. And you stop and you take this moment to really appreciate what you have right in front of you. It's not something out of reach. It's right there, and it's yours, and you did it for yourself, and now it's going to make you feel great.
Mm-hmm.
And you eat this food and you feel good. You don't feel lethargic. You don't feel like you want to go take a nap. You feel like you could, maybe take a walk around the block or something after dinner and get a little bit of exercise in to help your digestive system a little further. Mm-hmm. So it's a huge stress reliever.
Well, it certainly is that. Now, as you start, how long does it usually take for a person to sort of get on the mindful track, if you will, toward mindful nutrition and mindful eating?
Well, people are all very different. Some people fall into new habits pretty easily. Some people take a little bit more time. And that's okay. The taking smaller steps and arranging them where there's small action steps with a big outcome really keeps you excited about wanting to be mindful. I find most people, even after the first 2 weeks of using these techniques, maybe they're not there yet. I mean, most people aren't there yet, but they want to be. Mm-hmm. And that's a game changer. They see that this lifestyle is not only good for them, but it benefits them in so many ways that they're more eager to make these changes. And so, they say it takes 28 habits to form a day, 28 days to form a habit, but usually I see people make a full transition before a 3-month mark. I mean, which sounds somewhat long, but realistically 3 months is so quick. It's the blink of an eye. And to be able to make that kind of transition from feeling poorly because of the food you've ingested and 3 months later feeling confident about making your own food, going to the grocery store, and not being frightened by the cookie aisle, it's a huge change in people's lives. And what we tend to see is not only are they healthier, but they've got less pain and they've got a better mental stability. They're able to handle completely different stress at work, stress with relationships. It actually improves relationships with people, with your family, with even strangers. You see this huge improvement in people and they can really enjoy their daily life.
There's no doubt about that. Now, what you do, are you able to work with people non-locale, in other words, by phone or Skype, things like that?
Absolutely. In fact, we're all just so busy, as we've mentioned. It's hard to work our healthcare into that routine. And so I really try and work with clients on their terms so that fitting a better way of living doesn't come between them and their life. So I try and work with people over the phone or email or by text even. I have a texter that I work with who's out of state, and that's what works for her. By Skype, as you mentioned, or in person. I have one client who has kind of a fear of groups of people.
Oh, boy.
So I tend to meet her in quiet coffee houses, and we have a cup of coffee and a session, and that's what works for her. That's where she feels comfortable. She feels like she's able to talk. She feels like that's an environment that's, relaxing and safe for her. And that's what I really try and find with my clients. Whatever that is for someone, I'm pretty flexible. I'm able to work with a lot of different situations.
Well, that's very encouraging. And now your website, tell us about that and how people can find you.
The website is mwcenter.org, and the email that corresponds with that is goodhealth@mwcenter.org. And we're not super high up on the Google frame just yet.
Well, that's okay because we're tweeting you out to thousands of people right now. So we thought we would talk about the physical benefits to mindful nutrition and mindful eating. So they're going to find out more, and I'm sure I'll get a lot of interaction on that. Can people follow you on Twitter?
I'm not on Twitter.
Not quite yet, okay.
No, I haven't ventured into that market just yet. But I do have a Facebook and a Google Plus account, both of which you can easily get to right on the website. The Facebook seems to be a little bit more popular than the Google Plus as far as community. More people are involved in Facebook. And that's just facebook.com/mindful centering. And I do update different articles and affirmations and challenges for people all the time on the Facebook. Just little things that you can do to challenge yourself, even just for the day, just to get a concept, an idea of how it feels to be a little bit more mindful, or how to reduce some stress, or maybe some key foods that you might eat today, or just interesting articles that I really found interesting and thought I would share.
Well, very good. We appreciate you coming on the program today because, as we've been talking about, eating should be pleasurable. It should be, fun. You should feel good after having a meal regardless. And it's just getting people, away from their cell phones and away from technology and realizing they're not as busy as they think they were. And I think what is really good about cooking is the fact that it helps you slow things down, and be creative. And I think that's what more people should move toward.
I agree with that. It's funny because you hear people say, well, I just don't have time. And I tend to think to myself, well, you do. You're just not making that time.
Exactly.
Because there's a difference.
Yes. Coach them on how they spend each minute of their day, and you'll realize just how many minutes you really have for a lot of things that you really want to do. So.
Absolutely. And, couch potato syndrome is a big deal. And it's really an addictive behavior, honestly. Mm-hmm. And checking your phone and all those things so constantly, those are really addictions. We don't think of them like that because we don't think they're destroying our lives like alcohol or drugs would. But if you really break it down, I mean, the average person watches 4 to 6 hours of TV in a day. That's almost, a part-time job.
It is.
I mean, think of all the things we could be doing with that time. Yeah. And eating does slow things down. Cooking does slow things down, and preparing those meals for yourself. And if we were to transition even 2 hours of that time, an hour to cook and to eat, and maybe an hour to be outside, be in nature, center our brains. When we take a walk in nature, our mind goes on autopilot. We don't need to think about pick up left foot, put left foot down, pick up right foot. Our brains don't go through that process with us. It leaves them open to be more creative, to start thinking outside that box we've put ourselves in all day, cramped up at our desks or working at jobs. We have to do those things. We have to survive and we have to make money. That's how the world works. But we have to remember that we're important. Our bodies are important. Our health is important. It's really a top priority.
So become mindful about it.
Exactly. So start thinking about what you can actually be doing for yourself. I mean, sure, there are days when you're going to come home and you're just going to want to couch potato it up because you've just had enough. And that's okay, But every day, that starts to increase your stress load. You're not keeping your body healthy. So not only is it maintaining with all this, processed food that you're eating and exercise that you're not getting, but it doesn't have the time to just to release in a healthy way. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a simple shift, just getting people to pay attention to their day and what's going on in that day and not being bombarded by everything, by all the constant, it's hard to even go on a website anymore without something popping up or flashing or, trying to suck your attention away, So being more mindful and just keeping that focus, like, yes, I'm reading this article on celery, and this poppy flashy thing on the side about, don't eat certain foods because they'll make you fat. I don't need that. I just need to stay focused where I'm at because it's important for me.
Well, very good. Cody, we want to thank you, first of all, for having you come on the program today. It has been a real treat to have you on. And for our listeners, again, what is the website they can find out more?
The website they can find out more is mwcenter.org, or they can find me on Facebook under Mindful Centering.
Mindful Centering on Facebook. Cody, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today.
Thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate you having me.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there. Again, we put responsibility into your laps. If your life isn't going the direction you would like it to go, well, take the responsible steps to move in the direction you would. Perhaps mindful eating and mindful nutrition is the way you should consider your first step to be. Be sure to visit us at Beyond50Radio.com where you can find out more, and that is the number 50, and sign up for our free weekly e-news updates. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.